Why is it so hard to be a leader? Besides constant technological change, economic uncertainty, post-pandemic turmoil, dramatic shifts in generational expectations, global unrest, distributed workforces, and 27 other unexpected things that will show up in your inbox by the morning, it's a piece of cake, really. The good news? One thing remains constant throughout all of that: our need for human connection. And we can do great things when we embrace that need and create workplaces rooted in empathy and resilience. Today's guest on the DesuckifyWork Podcast has a ton of ideas on just how to do that. Josiah Pledl is a former school principal, business executive, and the founder of 45 Degrees Leadership Consulting. We talk about the crisis in leadership and how we can solve it if more of us connect our minds to our hearts and lead with emotional intelligence. We explore generational differences at work and learn why Gen Z may not be so fond of sarcasm. Whatever. And we blow up the established wisdom that culture eats strategy for breakfast. According to Josiah, they should sit down for a nice meal together and respect each other's contributions. All of this talk of food has me pretty hungry. Good thing Josiah is serving up some tasty morsels during our conversation. So let's dig in. Okay, Josiah Pledl, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thanks for having me so much, TJ. I'm excited to be here and to jump in, and I'm eager to help you desuckify work today.
I like it. Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job already on LinkedIn from what I'm seeing. So keep that up. I'd love to give people a chance to get to know you before we dive in. So tell us a little bit about your story. What are you doing for work and how'd you come to be doing it?
Yeah, so I founded 45 Degrees Leadership Development. I'm a solopreneur launching my own leadership consulting company. And what I do is I help leaders equip themselves to connect their head to their heart. And that means executing emotional intelligence in their leadership, specifically in the model that they lead, and then in communication. And human interaction is where you build that connection. And so that's where you need to execute the emotional intelligence when you're working with others to get the full impact. So that's what I do is I help leaders unlock kind of the direction on that massive 16-inch journey from your head to your heart that you got to take every single day and every single moment when you're leading others. And how I got here has been a wild, rocky road, to be straight up with it, TJ. Awesome. I graduated college, started working with an energy efficient lighting company in business development and sales. And I started coaching high school football. And it was at that point where I wanted to kind of pivot careers. The business world really wasn't doing it for me. And I wanted to either become a lawyer or become a teacher. And I took the LSAT, which I do not wish that on my worst enemy. And partially because of that experience, I chose to become an educator and started teaching, worked in alternative education, taught social studies, which is my passion. And ultimately, my real passion was working in special education and helping kids with disabilities prepare for life after high school. And from that led me to leadership. And I was a principal of a middle school with about 500 kids. And COVID, all the societal issues, the mess, everything that's going on that you read about on social media, not on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms. But it was coming into schools. And my wife said, you know, your goal, our next step is become a superintendent. And I don't ever want our family to go through what the family of a superintendent does. Or goes through. I got a 5-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and they mean the world to me. And that hit me hard. And so I left education to launch a leadership development training program at a company with about 700 employees located in 41 states across the United States. And it was at that company where I was fortunate to see leadership where you get the balance right, the flavor right of driving results, but also take care of your people. And this company had an 87% favorable employee engagement score. Their manager effectiveness score was 90% favorable. And in the first quarter of 2023, they broke all quarterly revenue records in the 20-year history. And so it is absolutely possible. I watched it happen. I was very fortunate to be a part of it. I was very fortunate to have them pour into me and help me in my own development. But you can get the balance right of valuing, taking care of people, protecting integrity, and also driving tremendous business results. And that led me to create my own frameworks, create my own business. And I'm here today to talk to you about it, TJ.
That is a pretty interesting and cool journey. I mean, I think the mix of the academic background and the business and leadership background probably serves you well, and we'll probably dive into some of that for sure. There's a couple of questions I like to ask as we dive into this, just to see kind of where you sit on some things. You know, one thing I always ask is, what's your personal suckiest work story? Just to give sort of like a sense of like what you've experienced in your own world.
Wow, that's complex. And I got to kind of see who, what I can share and what I can't share, right?
Yeah.
So I would say the suckiest thing that I ever experienced was I was working on a project. I was told by my manager to execute this project. I started executing it with very vague alignment and clarity of what the expectation was. All right. And so I started doing it, and I was getting feedback from my manager on this and that and change this. And then finally the manager said, follow this format. We got it dialed in now. Follow these steps. All right. And I started following that, and I came to the manager 2 weeks in and said, look, these are my concerns, like with this, how we're moving forward with this based on your directive. I want you to be aware of this concern, and it's concerning to me. And the message was, let's stay the course and kind of see what happens. And so I did, and I continued to follow the directive that I was given by my manager. And after some time, my manager comes to me and tells me that there is a problem with what we've been doing. And the problem is exactly what I brought forward a couple weeks into the change. And I was tasked with fixing that problem.
Okay.
And so I'm like, hold on a second here. Like, I followed a directive. You gave me the directive. I brought concerns that this was an issue. You said no. And now you're going to tell me that I need to fix the issue that I brought to your attention because of your directive? Like, what are we doing here? Right.
Oh, so
that was probably the most frustrating, suckiest thing that I've experienced.
Yeah. Sadly, I think there's probably people who will be listening or watching this and nodding their heads, because I think, this is part of the reason you're doing what you're doing probably is to help get leaders into a place where that doesn't happen so often, right? Where you're not, in that instance, really connecting to your emotional intelligence. You're sort of staying in your head and staying in process and system, and not connecting to the need to connect and listen and truly listen to the person who's saying, I'm sensing a problem over here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up, because in leadership development and in training, it's common to do this activity where you give people those giant Post-it notes and you tell them basically, all right, write down all the things about a bad boss and then write down all the things about a good boss, right? The bad boss, good boss exercise. It happens all the time if you've done leadership development. Yep. And on that giant Post-it note, the bad boss takes up 90% of the page. Micromanaging, insecure, fake, self-interest, ego, blah, blah, blah. And then on the good manager, the good boss, it's like 5-6 things, right? They communicated well, they empowered me, they gave me support, they mentored me. And the reality is, TJ, leadership is hard.
Yeah.
And I've made so many mistakes, and I've had so many failures, legitimate failures. And you learn from that. And even when I share the suckiest thing, that manager was doing the best that they thought they were doing. It's not because they're an evil human being or whatever. It's just leadership is hard. And so I come here, to coach leaders, to help develop leaders on how to connect the head to the heart, and completely acknowledge that it's way easy for me to sit here on this side of the Zoom and tell you how to do leadership. I can get in front of a conference room and look like I have all the answers, right? I don't. And this is hard, and the people that are doing it are out there competing and battling every single day, trying to do it right through other human beings, which is incredibly complex. And so come here to serve and to help And if you can learn a thing or two from the mistakes that I've made, I'm happy with that. But please don't for any second think that I've got all the answers and got it all figured out.
Yeah, it's funny because I think the buzz or the feeling that people might have about coaches, people who help leaders or whatever, is that some of them do this, present themselves as somebody who does have all the answers. Just follow my protocol and it will be perfect. Versus what I hear you saying is, no, I've got some experience. I can shed some light on some things. I can hear things in what you might tell me that you won't even notice, but I'm not going to be there and be like, it's easy. And if you just do what I do, it's going to be perfect. And that, to me, there's a distinction in the way coaches can show up as experts who have it all figured out versus somebody with experience who can shine a light on what you're experiencing through the lens of knowing maybe a few things that you don't. And there's a distinction there, I think,
Yeah. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I had a tremendous awakening when I did a behavior assessment, and I wrote a post on LinkedIn about how my personality type is, I'm highly autonomous. I'm a visionary thinker. I want to go 100 miles an hour. I'm hyper social.
Mm-hmm.
I have zero patience. And the analyst told me that I believe that the 10 commandments are the 10 suggestions, and I'm not going to adhere to policy or procedures if there's a better way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
There's tremendous strength in that. But then when you look at if that's not checked,
Mm-hmm.
the words that describe me are aggressive, belligerent, vulgar, volatile, hostile, extreme. And so that's why I'm so passionate about executing emotional intelligence, is because I have to focus on it. Otherwise, I can't connect with people. I can connect with some people, and the people that want to go fast and want to go 100 miles an hour and just take action, they love it. But the reality is everybody else is intimidated, uncomfortable, fearful, angry, offended by how I naturally present myself. And so I've had to do a ton of work on the heart, and the heart work's the hard work. And I have what that analyst said, don't hire somebody like Josiah unless they've experienced road rash. Because they will experience road rash, and you don't want it to happen when they're on your team, right? So, and that's the reality, and that's what brought me to this and drives my passion about this, is I have to work at it every single day, and I fail every single day. But if I can share a little bit in my failures and some of my expertise and knowledge and combine it to help another person avoid it, that's one heck of a day, TJ, and that's why I get up every morning.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think that self-awareness can change a lot for you as a leader and just as a person, how you interact with others. I know for me, one of the things I learned is that I'm a obsessive problem solver. And what I realize is that I'll try to solve problems that people don't want solving. They come to me with a problem, they just want to hear it. And my brain starts already running down the path of solving the problem. So I think now that once I recognize that, you can check it. But I think for a lot of leaders, this is probably maybe at the core for a lot of leaders is that self-awareness isn't fully there yet. And so they've recognized that what works for them in some situations they think it should work everywhere. And so they're not able to sort of modulate how they interact with different people. And you just kind of steamroll with this is my thing. It worked with this person and this person. And what you're saying, and what I love is, okay, there's some subset of people that liked let's just go, let's just get it done. But there's a lot of people who don't know how to deal with that. So how do you help people come face to face with those kinds of realizations about themselves?
So that level of, that has to come in a one-on-one coaching session. And so my business, business to business sales is one-on-one coaching. Then there's notes, and then there's workshops. And to get to that level of self-awareness, that's personal. It has to be the right environment. It has to be the right setting. A keynote is definitely not that, and a workshop for sure isn't that either. And so it comes in a lot of reflection and a lot of, asking questions that kind of drive the reflection. And when you look at coaching, and I touched on it before, the best coaches out there don't tell you anything. You tell yourself what you need to hear because they ask you questions that bring you to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a joke with my friends and family that my entire life, there's nobody that asks more questions than I do. And I've gotten good at it because of experience. And now I'm getting paid back tenfold because my 5-year-old son asks more questions than I think I ever have in my life total. And he's done it in 5 years. And so paybacks are you know what I'm saying?
I do.
So I'm living that. But it's that in the root of it is to get somebody to really become aware. It's through questioning, it's through guided journaling, it's through reflection. And part of the communication model, the last piece of it that I equip people with is reflection. And you have to be deliberate in calendaring and scheduling time to reflect if you want to get better. When I coach football, when you watch NFL teams, after a game, their entire team gets together and watches the film. The individual position groups get together and they watch the film. That is reflection. Yeah. And when you look at leadership, you always, usually for me, I don't know about you, but it only pops into my mind at about 3:00 in the morning, right? And I wish, why did I say that? I could have said this. I should have said that. And if you don't commit to that reflection and have the right prompts and the right questioning, it's really, really tough to gain that awareness.
Yeah. And I think when it shows up at 3 a.m, it may show up as that kind of very self-critical voice versus a self-reflective voice. If you sit there and journal at 10 o'clock at night and say, that conversation I had with Susie earlier, I think I could have maybe done it better. What were the things I did that I could do better? Like, you're going to do it in this sort of systematic, productive way versus wake up at 3 a.m. and go, oh, I'm an idiot, and then you're going to carry I'm an idiot with you instead of carry I could do better with me. Right. And those are two very different states. So, our natural mechanisms are not always as strong as the ones we can build some structure around by like sitting down and actively reflecting. And it's kind of remarkable to me that that's not, at least in my experience, you're not really made aware of that all that often. Like as you become, get stepped up into leadership positions, nobody says like, first of all, nobody really tells you how hard it is. And then nobody really tells you like, you're going to make a lot of mistakes and you need to reflect on them and try to get better. And here's some thoughts on how to do it. So I love that you're bringing that to people and providing that for people. I think that that's needed. And it brings me to a question, something that you've written about a little. I think the lack of training maybe feeds into this along with just the general chaos of our lives these days. But you talk about there being a leadership crisis. And first off, what do you mean by that? And how is it showing up? And what can we do about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it's scary. And I started seeing it. And I would say my awareness happened in working with youth and education. And you start to, I'm 44. I graduated high school in 97. The world is very, very different since the late 90s. But when I was in high school and younger, turning 16, getting your driver's license, like that was your first like introduction to freedom and control and ultimately leadership, right? Like you're on your own and you now have a way to get away from the nest and fly, and there's nobody there to coach you and direct you, and you're leading yourself. And I started seeing kids in high school, with no desire to get their driver's license. And then, the other piece was I want to grow up. I want to go to school. I want to go get a job. I want to get out of the house. And now you see kids, I'm going to take a gap year. I'm just going to hang out at home and figure out what I want to do with my life. And some of that's good. And some of it's, I don't want to go out on my own. I don't want to have to lead myself. Like this is way too comfy. And then get into athletics and you see, a youth football team that can't find a kid to play quarterback. And the kid doesn't want the ball in their hands. Nobody wants to make the decision. Nobody wants to lead. Wow. When I was a kid, you had, 20 kids you had to tell, no, you can't be a quarterback, right? Exactly. And that was one of them. I'm 6'4", 350 pounds, and I think I can rock Tom Brady, right? And that was the reality back in the day, but it's not that anymore. And then you look at the top of leadership, and I mean, I don't want to get political, but honestly, all I got to say is what's going on with our presidential election, right? Like, seriously, we can't find candidates that are, younger, maybe more skilled, maybe whatever you want to say. And I'm talking both, not to get political, but
no, I get it.
Where we're at. And so it's not just here either. You start to talk with people across the world, and they're experiencing the same things where people don't want to serve in local public office. You get people, they don't want to run for alderman, let alone president, right? And I hear my friends say, I led people at work. I don't want to do it again. I just want to show up, do my job, go home. I don't want the politics. I don't want the drama. I don't want any of that stuff. I just want to do my job and get home and spend time with my family. Well, okay, but somebody's got to lead, right? And what I call it is the risk and the responsibility of leadership. And then there's fears that come with that: failure, judgment, criticism, attacks on social media, and got this risk and responsibility, and then all these fears of what comes with it. And it's really, really easy to say, no, I'm cool. Like I'm just going to do my thing. And that starts to spread, and then you hear somebody, say, hey, TJ gave up that people leader thing, and he shows up, he works 9 to 5, he goes home, he's coaching his kids' teams, he looks healthier. Have you seen his face lately? Like he's walking, he's working out. Like, look at him. I want that, right? And so now I'm going to start looking for a position where I don't have to lead others. And all of this is just growing. And it's put us at what is really a crisis point with a lack of people wanting to lead. But then the bigger piece is the shift in what's required to lead today. And that's what I focus on is the labor market. You used to bring value by what you could do physically. We were a farming society, right? And over time, that physical value shifted to the mind. So we went from the body to the mind. And now rapid AI is coming in, and some of those knowledge pieces, I don't need to take a class on Excel right now. I can type into ChatGPT, this is what I want out of Excel. Can you give me a formula? In the blink of an eye, I copy and paste, and it's kicking out a linear regression. I don't got the 180-page statistics book that I got on my shelf. I don't need it, right? And so when you look at how AI is supplementing intelligence, we went from the body to the mind, and now the shift is to the heart. And leadership from the heart is what needs to happen. And there's a lot of people, especially in the more senior generations in the labor force, that have a very, very different view on the meaning of work, on vision and importance in tying your personal mission to your job. And the younger two generations, Z and millennials, have a very, very different view on meaning at work and additional power and all these things. And so the bridge to connect the two younger generations with the two older, that bridge connecting them is executing emotional intelligence.
What does that look like, executing emotional intelligence?
So you can look up the term emotional intelligence, and you're going to hear all this stuff about awareness of emotions, self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, all of this stuff, right? And at the root of all of that is understanding your emotions and the emotions of others. But what I teach in executing emotional intelligence is not just understanding emotions, but executing frameworks and models that allow you to leverage emotion of yourself and of others to drive results that you never thought were possible before, or your organizations never realized before.
What would be a good example of that?
So the first piece is employee engagement. There's all kinds of research and statistics that engaged employees are more productive. They're more profitable. There's all these business cases that show that employee engagement is better business results. All right. And employee engagement comes down to communication. And it's all across the organization, from the C-suite all the way down to the frontline managers. You need to have clarity, alignment, and support. And as a leader, you give those three things. And Jeff Bezos said it best. He said, as a leader, you be firm on your vision, but you be flexible on execution. And that's aligns with what I teach. It's called freedom within fences. As the leader, you provide the vision, you provide the alignment, you put the fence around, and then you let the people you brought in that are smart into that pasture, into that fenced in area, and let them go wild and execute on your vision and get yourself out of the way. And if they can't do it, then you got a talent acquisition problem, right? Then so you bring in smart people, get out of the way, let them do what you brought them in to do, but do it in a way that you're all aligned and you all have clarity and you all have support to end up at the place that you both know you want to get to. And that is what that looks like.
It's interesting because in some ways, at least I think of some of the more challenging jobs I've been in, it's almost the reverse, right? There's a lack of freedom, meaning you get a lot of micromanaging and da-da-da-da-da. And on top of that, you have no clarity on what the actual vision is, right? So you show up as an employee ready to like serve and do something great. And you find out that you don't really know exactly what we're doing it for, but I know I've got somebody hovering over me 24 hours a day to get this weird little thing done or this other project done. And the frustration that can come from that, right? You don't know what the purpose is of the work you're doing, and you're not even being given the freedom to do it your way. So you're basically flipping that script and saying, it's important to create some structure, right? The structure is the vision. The structure is we're all pointing in this direction. But then the trust comes in. I hired you. I believe in you. Why the hell would I sit there and stand over your shoulder virtually or not every day, telling you what to do, pushing the pixels for you, instead of standing back and letting you show me a solution that maybe I couldn't have come up with? How do you find anybody that you work with that comes in with sort of that old school mentality of a little more micromanaging? And when they do, if they do, how do you get them to see the ability of standing back and letting their teams really do the work?
Well, so a couple things is, what do you think drives a manager to not commit to sharing with you the expectations clearly, the vision clearly? Like, what would drive somebody not to do that?
I would assume it's because if I'm that manager, I'm probably not clear on it. That's what I would think.
There's a big piece of that. And then there's also the accountability piece. If I don't tell you exactly what to do and things go wrong, who's responsible for that? It's not me.
Right.
Hey, they're needy, right? They get too much attention. I told them what to do. They couldn't execute on it. It's their problem. It's not a me problem as the leader.
Yeah. Some avoiding. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it gives you that, in legal terms, I think they call it plausible deniability, right?
Yep.
And so you don't put yourself attached to any expectation, then you're not going to be accountable if above you has issues with you and your team, right? And so that's what I found. That the piece about how you change that is, I deal with it often, right? You get, and some of this stuff may be true, right? You hear people, this generation is soft. This generation doesn't have a work ethic. They're only concerned about themselves, their feelings, like all of these things, right?
Right.
And so you have Gen Z, millennials. Then you have Gen X, and you have baby boomers who are exiting at a rapid rate. And within a year or two, it's already like, I think 27% of labor force is Gen Z right now. And that's exponentially increasing.
Yeah.
So I just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with some leaders, and I said, I'm hearing you say they're soft, they don't have a work ethic, there's no loyalty, they care about their feelings and this mission and purpose rather than results. And without results, I can't keep the doors open. So all of those things may be true. I'm not here to tell you it's not true or it is, whatever. I personally feel it may be different than how you're perceiving things, but let's just assume right now you're right. All right. So you have a choice as a leader. You're the president of this company, you're CEO of this company, or whatever. You can continue to say all these negative things about the younger people in the workforce, and you can sit back and you can wait for all of them to change to align with your views. Or you can change, because that's the one thing you control, and you can still be upset. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your values or your core beliefs or your principles. Right. I'm just asking you to manage to your people and lead to your people rather than vice versa and expect your people to come up to your leadership style.
Mm.
And one you have control over and one you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, your P&L is you, and your P&L you may think stands for profit and loss, but everything on that P&L, good or bad, doesn't come down to profit and loss. It comes to a different P&L. It comes to people and learning.
Mm.
And all the results on that P&L are driven by your people. So if you want that P&L to change,
Mm-hmm.
you can either change to meet your people or you can wait. And at the end of the day, I'm here to help you, but I go home tonight and I'm going to be sleeping just fine because I'm a solopreneur and I don't have these culture issues.
Right.
You choose what you want to do with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the reality is you don't have to change, but the world with the way change is happening right now and how fast it's happening, you don't have to, but if you want to go the way of Blockbuster, if you want to go the way of whatever other company, MySpace, and the social media stuff, that's where it's at right now. You can either choose to adapt and try to push yourself and own what you can control, which is you, or you can resist it and you are going to get steamrolled at some point. That's real.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because when you talk about that leader who has some judgment about the younger generation, I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. Like lead to the people, like meet them where they are. But also, I think there's this like model for them. Show up as what a real leader should be, right? Because what you're basically doing is copping out, right? I'm basically saying my P&L sucks because I got a bunch of lazy 20 and 30-year-olds. That's what I'm saying. Like, what are you modeling at that stage, right? I mean, you're basically just like you're sort of having a temper tantrum, right?
Yeah.
Versus, okay, I'm going to tap into my emotional intelligence. I'm going to look around. I'm going to become aware of the world around me, of the people around me, and I'm going to figure out what they need to succeed. And by doing so, I'm actually going to be modeling a better behavior that will then, coming back to your leadership crisis thing, get a few people at least to go, ooh, that's what leadership can look like. I might want to do that. I don't want to do what I've seen from, all these other folks that are doing doing it the old way, but that looks like real leadership. And maybe I might actually want to aspire to that. So you're creating this massive impact by making such a simple change there, which I really love,
Yeah, and there's two things that the minute you point your finger, you have three fingers pointing right back at you.
Yep.
And then the other piece of it is Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, is so real. And
yeah,
I mean, that's the risk and responsibility of leadership is that you own everything, the good and the bad, and you can deflect and you can push back, but at some point, it's all going to come back on you. And so the faster you realize that, the faster you accept that, the faster you own that, you're naturally going to come to a point that you need to serve. And your people don't need to serve you.
Right.
And that is when you start to drive change. That's when you start looking at companies that have these crazy, engagement scores, when they have profitability that's just crushing it over and over again, because people are empowered. And when you have empowered people, you get powerful results. And it's that simple.
Yeah. It's I don't know, the whole generational thing is interesting. I think there's some value into understanding what generational trends are, but then I think you need to be wary of being too sort of locked into stereotypes, right? So get some high level knowledge, but then talk to people as people and empower your leaders. So if I'm a CEO, empower my managers to have conversations and be curious about what's going on for you, what's going on, what's showing up for you, how can I support you as an individual to better get you to do the things you want to do in your career. They may be showing up with these sort of highfalutin ideas about purpose that maybe some folks are like, oh, that sounds a little soft compared to the P&L. But as a manager, you can show up and connect those dots, right? You can go, here's what our purpose is as an organization. Here's the change we're trying to drive. Here's how you can impact that. And here's how you can show up in a way where you're feeling directly connected to the work. I'm giving you space to do the kind of work that you're capable of and have the kind of career growth you want. And you're pointing towards something. And now if you don't want to point towards that thing, you have the ability to then decide to leave. But at least I know. I think a lot of young people show up at a big company and go, I have no idea what this company is pointing towards. I have no idea what problems they're trying to solve. And certainly my boss isn't telling me. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, starting at the top and then empowering those frontline managers to get the most out of people. And it sounds like your approach is working towards that. Am I right in that?
Yeah, that's absolutely where it's headed. And I just read a report by the United States Surgeon General that they have a directive on how to increase human connection. And so we have an issue where we're more connected than ever before, but we're actually least connected than ever before. And the reality is I'm connected to a ton of people on social media, on Facebook. And for me, myself, what you see on my Facebook feed, that's not my real life.
Yeah.
That's my highlight reel, right? Like that's the Sports Center highlights that you would watch in the morning of everything that went well.
Right.
And so you get this like jaded perception of others that isn't real authentic connection. So yeah, the data on your phone, you might have 8,000 connections, but how many of those are you actually connected to? So as a society, we're craving human connection more than ever.
Yeah.
And then we're also craving meaning in work in a different way. And it's Tamara Miles, who I'm connected with on LinkedIn. She's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Her thing is meaning at work. And the number one thing in her paper, her research was that to drive meaning is contribution. And that's contribution to your team, that's to your bigger organization, and then also to a cause or a mission that benefits society. And so if you can align engagement, which comes through how you treat people, right? And how you basically communicate and interact with people, with providing meaning by giving them an opportunity to contribute.
Yeah.
Sky's the limit. And so that's what I'm trying to get to. And we're going to talk later about, what does a desuckified workplace look like? But what is that, right? Like what's possible if we get to that?
Yeah. I mean, she was on this show a handful of episodes back, and I love that conversation around meaning because she connects it very clearly downstream to the results that CEOs are clamoring for, right? So the meaning that you can provide for people in the work they do will ultimately lead to the productivity, which leads to the P&L that all of the CEOs are sitting there going, these people only want, purpose and meaning. It's like, well, yeah, and you should too, because if you give it to them, your P&L is going to change and it's going to go up. And so I'm grateful for that kind of work, because I know for me, I like speaking about things like purpose and meaning, but I haven't done the research. So it's wonderful that there's research out there that can connect those dots. And I think the more leaders can become aware of that, they can both understand it and then implement it. How do I operationalize meaning in my company? How do I get it down to every employee? Not just the leadership team, but, young junior employee, Gen Z shows up day one. What can I do to connect them to some way of finding meaning at work? Because that's how we're going to succeed. And that conversation needs to just keep happening, because I think it's like just scratching the surface of being really understood,
I would agree. And I had an incredible meeting with a CEO of a company, about 200 employees. I want to say $150 million in revenue last year, founded, and built from the ground up. And their culture is incredible. They went a full quarter with about 200 employees with zero turnover.
Wow.
And he said to me, I want to do your stuff. There's value in it. We can do more in leadership development. Right now, though, my house isn't on fire. And so I've got boom, 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 boom as priorities, but let's stay in touch for later this year, right? And he said, but before we do that, he asked me all the questions. Every CEO, the first question, how do we scale this, right? And we talked about that. But then he asked me a really tough question, and I did not do the best job answering it. in that moment, but I've thought about it like relentlessly since is, how do you coach somebody on emotional intelligence?
Mm.
And what you just said about meaning, and you hear about, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel welcome, I feel like I can show up as my true self. I
Hmm.
don't feel small, all those things. But what does that mean? And
Right.
so when you talk about coaching emotional intelligence, when you talk about operationalizing meaning, when you talk about things that finance guys and operations guys in the C-suite want to hear,
Hmm.
um, it comes down to, you have to make it observable behaviors.
Hmm.
And so when somebody says, when I talk to my manager, I don't feel seen, and you start to get in that coaching, when I talked about asking good questions, you start to pull out that, every time I'm in a meeting with my manager, they are looking at their computer screen as we're talking. They
Hmm.
are checking their phone as they get a text message. If anybody above me, positional power wise, walks through, they ignore me and start talking to them as they come into the room. And
Mm.
so all of those things, I
Hmm.
can coach, I can change. I
Yeah.
know what I need to do, right?
Hmm.
If somebody tells me I don't feel seen, I'm leaving that thinking, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
what do I do? What do you want me? What do you want from me? I want to help
Mm.
you. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And so
Hmm.
this is the thing, TJ, with all this stuff is, if you want to change behaviors,
Hmm.
you have to coach behaviors.
Yeah.
And so when you look at execute emotional intelligence and we start to dive into, what does it mean for somebody to feel heard?
Hmm.
Well, it means that you are asking questions that drive deep and rich discussion, that are open-ended, but never the why question, right? You're asking
Hmm.
how and what questions, because that gets a lot richer dialogue going. You are,
Hmm.
acknowledging, you're repeating things, asking for understanding, clarifying questions, and
Hmm.
and all of that. But what I teach is that listening and understand isn't it anymore. Like it's got to be raised a couple notches and start moving to listening to empathize. And
Mm.
that's a key piece of my communication framework, is that you start to listen for somebody's needs, challenges, objectives, desires, and experiences.
Hmm.
And as you're hearing the dialogue, you're asking yourself, am I making those easier or tougher?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now you've operationalized what it means to empathize with somebody.
Hmm.
And in my communication framework, the first, you don't get to act until it's the fourth step in the five. And you got
Mm.
to engage the heart and the mind before you engage the jaw, in
Right.
order to communicate, to connect. And that's what I'm here to help people do, and equip people and unlock their ability to do that.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I think that the key takeaway for me is like, you're finding a way to get to something tangible by starting with the emotion and going, okay, let's unpack this emotion. Let's find out what's underneath it. How is that showing up in behavior? I really like that connection of like, okay, I don't feel seen. Okay, what does that mean? Well, looks at his phone all the time when we're in a meeting. Okay, now there's a behavior that I can connect to that I can then you can be coached on and go, okay,
Yeah.
have you noticed you do that during some of your meetings with your direct reports? Oh yeah, but I'm so busy and blah 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 blah. Do you ever wonder like how that might make them feel and maybe disempowering them to want to do the work that you ultimately need them to do? I hadn't thought about it, but and you're kind of walking them through the ability to then ultimately feel empowered themselves like, oh, if I can do these things, great. And then when I communicate about what I want done, I'm not at odds with how I actually show up, right? Because I think that can be a problem. If I want you to be this way, this way, this way. Oh, by the way, I'm not any of those things. I'm not paying attention to you. I'm not listening. I'm not doing all the good things. So I love the sound of your framework because it really connects the sort of very like KPI side of the conversation with the emotional side, and feels like it brings them together in a way where a lot of the conversation feels like we're just lobbing like results are all that matter. Yeah, but what about my emotions? And there's nobody saying, how do I connect those two so that we actually get the best out of all of it? And that's what I'm hearing in what you're doing. So I'm gonna take that and dive into a question that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds, but I'm curious how your framework is handling. You mentioned AI earlier, and I've seen you post a little bit about it. How do you lead in this moment where AI is diving in, and can your tools that you're talking about, can they be employed in this process of figuring out how to lead as AI is taking up more and more of our headspace?
It's the only way to lead right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have heard, legitimate fear of, my job is going to be replaced by AI. I don't want AI. AI is evil. Like all of this negativity, right? And in my post, I said, ultimately AI isn't going to necessarily take your job, but what is going to take your job is the summer intern that knows how to use AI better than you do. And
Yep.
this is the difference is if all that I bring to the relationship is competence, AI is absolutely going to automate or replace the value that you bring. All right.
Yep.
If I can bring to this relationship what is my leadership model, where competence still matters, but it didn't like it used to. And so my leadership model starts with connection, which is an awareness of myself and an awareness of others. And once we start to get that connection, we have to spend time, which is accessibility and visibility. And we move that connection to chemistry. And that's where I know what you're going to say before I ask. I know what you're going to do before you do it, because we know each other. We're aware of each other's strengths, weaknesses, that we start to develop that chemistry. And then from there comes competence. And that's the leadership model. And that's rooted in the old quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you lead today, if you lead with competence and that's all you bring, you are absolutely going to get replaced because AI is more competent than you and is faster and more efficient. And the biggest piece, way less expensive than you. And so let's look at this. If I'm a business owner and I got something that can do a job faster, more efficient, and for less cost, which one am I choosing? And it's not evil and it's not wrong.
Right. Just is.
That's business, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at my leadership model, competence still matters, but you have to bring more to the table than just competence, or you will get automated. And the other piece of that is the most critical piece of a high-performing team is trust. And I've created a formula to build trust in teams, and it sounds like this, TJ. It's connection plus chemistry plus competence. Does that sound familiar?
Well, it certainly resonates.
It's the leadership model.
Yeah.
It's my leadership model. It's 45 degrees leadership model. It's designed to lead in a way that builds trust because competence can be replaced by AI.
Right.
I brought up the Excel spreadsheet. I can become a statistical wizard in Excel in 3 seconds if I know how to write the right prompt.
Yeah.
But with that, AI is only as powerful as the human being using it. I can give 2 prompts, or I can give 2 tasks to 2 people, one that's good at ChatGPT, one that's not, and get wildly different products. You see it in the posts on LinkedIn every day, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the reality is that AI cannot replace the power of a human smile. AI cannot replace the connection of a firm handshake while somebody's looking you in the eyes and making eye contact with you and shaking their head. Certain things that AI will never, ever be able to replace because of the power and desire of humans to be connected to each other. And if you look to lead in a way that leverages the things that AI can't automate or replace, you're all good. And I'm here to help you.
Yeah. I think the fear that some people might have is that that we lose the ability to recognize that importance, meaning you talk about us being more disconnected from ever, even though we've got, 10,000 connections across social media platforms. Like, do we numb ourselves into oblivion in a way where suddenly we forget, that we really like to see each other smile, and we like the feeling of that firm handshake in person where we're looking somebody directly in the eye, where that conversation where you're just sitting at a coffee shop and half of it's not even words. It's just, somebody sort of giving you the body language that knows that you're being supported. As we remove ourselves from that, because we're getting like surface level bites of it through various digital means, do we run the risk that And this even connects back to like, nobody's really stepping into leadership. Kids don't want to drive, like all this stuff. Like we get into this avoidance mode so deeply that we allow ourselves to just become sort of victims of a competency driven world versus a world where that connection and that chemistry are what really keep us alive. I mean, I know that's kind of a high level question, but what do you think about that? And how do we keep people engaged so that we don't go down that path?
Yeah, that's whoa. How much time do we have left? No, that's complex. And I don't even know that it's as much that we avoid connection anymore, as much as we're just so dependent on instant gratification. And we can get so much of that gratification without having to interact. I can purchase whatever I want right now without leaving my home, and it'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Where I used to have to go to a store, and you know what happens at a store? I would have to interact with people. And so I think it has to be that, we have to be intentional on leveraging and celebrating the power and impact of human connection. And that comes down into being intentional and deliberate in doing that. Yeah. And reminding people, maybe it's reminding and supporting and saying, hey, I'm going to make you experience what it's like to interact with a human.
Yeah.
And then let's see how you respond. And I deal with it with my kids where it's, all right, now iPad's going down. Like we're done with Minecraft, Caleb. Like, people are more important than devices is what I tell my kids. And so there's that. But then the other piece is that if you look at any issue in history, it's always a pendulum that swings back and forth. And I believe that very soon we're going to start having adults having children that grew up almost their entire lives with a cell phone in their pocket, saw their friends or they experienced their mental health being destroyed as an adolescent due to social media and due to cell phones.
Yeah.
And parents are going to say, I'm not doing this to my kids. And I think we're right. And call me an optimist, call me way too positive, but I think we have enough. I watched for years adolescents get their mental health destroyed by Snapchat. And I think at some point that pendulum's going to shift and those kids are going to become parents and they're going to say, what everybody said for the history of mankind is, I want my kids to have more than I had.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. And I already see kind of it bubbling up a little bit. I mean, there's clearly a certain faction of people who are standing up for humanity, for lack of a better term, who are just going like, we matter and what we have together as humans matters. And I do think some of those younger parents are probably, going to be like, I want the thing that I didn't really get, being connected to a device almost 24/7. And how can I create that? It's not going back to some earlier time, but it's creating something new, a new way of being that allows the connection and the chemistry to become a part of life. I certainly think, any of us who are in the world of any kind of helping professions and out there talking to people can certainly do our part to just at least voice like this value and just continually to kind of like remind people that we matter and that it's important for us to, whatever technology comes up, because there'll be something else coming that'll be, there's always something, right? How do we continue to have all of it serve us as humanity versus us becoming sort of servant to it? And I think that's the battle that we're seeing. And I'm an optimist too. So I do think we can do it, but I think we all need to, like, where we have a voice, use that voice. And where we have the ability to show people a path towards that, we should show people a path towards that. Meaning, like, even what you said about your kids, like, this is the way I do it. People matter more than devices. We put the devices down at this time. Just helping people, modeling behavior, I think can matter a lot there. But like you said, we could probably have a whole nother conversation about this because it's a deep subject, but it's one I hope we just keep going with. I wanted to dive into a few other things because I love how in your posts, you're not afraid to kind of shake things up. offer like a slightly counter perspective on something, or take established wisdom and go, maybe not. So I want to throw a few of those out here just to get your take, and also just to get people to hear some of the ways that you're thinking about the world. One of the first ones that you, I think, mentioned was I think it's Drucker's phrase, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," which I think on its surface, a lot of people just nod their head and go, well, yes, because culture is so important, and that's sort of the foundation of a company. So when you say, not so sure, what do you mean?
Can either one of those survive on their own?
I've seen people try. I'll give it that, but I don't think it works very well. No.
So if culture were to, in fact, eat strategy, and there's no strategy, but there's people having a blast, they're having free pizza parties every single day, they got endless time to use their free membership at the gym, there are little pens and whatever goodie bags on their desk every single day when they come home. The donuts are fresh and in the break room every single day. The coffee is hot. It's not even actually coffee. They actually you can on your Slack just order a custom Starbucks delivered to your desk every single day at no charge, because hey, we got culture, man. But strategy, we ate that. Done. All right. So the end result, people are going to be happy. People are going to have a blast. Everything's going to be rosy. People aren't going to get paid. There's going to be no, there's plenty of $1 million ideas, but they only become $1 million ideas when there's $1 million execution. And so that's the culture side. If you go just and have the greatest strategy in the world, and you have zero culture and you have nothing going on, you're not going to have people left, because they'll produce results for a while and they'll leave, and then you'll start overtraining somebody, and then there's a learning curve, and there's there's opportunity cost with that, and there's impact bottom line that comes with that. And so nobody needs to be eating anything for breakfast. Let's eat French toast and pancakes and ham and cheese omelets, and let's let culture and strategy work together. And when you get those right, everybody's having steak for breakfast. Everybody's having whatever they want for breakfast. And everybody, more importantly, culture is at one seat at the table, strategy's at another seat at the table, and you're at the other seat with it. And that's when you start to win. Yeah.
No, I think that makes sense. I think a lot of the problem with this is, like, if you ask 10 people to define what culture means, you'd get 10 different definitions. And I think you might even get it for strategy, right? Because I think, like, some people's strategy is like super high level vision, but not necessarily the tactical strategy. Other people like, no, strategy is like, what are we going to do over the next 30 days? Like, and then culture, for some people, culture is the free donuts and the pizzas and the drinks. But for others, and I would say this is what I'd like culture's definition to be, is actually one that almost weaves strategy into it, meaning it's how we show up each day. It's how we're supported. It's how we lead. It's what's my experience like every day at work, beyond the wellness perks and all the other stuff, which are nice. I'm not going to say they're not nice, but those things don't mean anything if I don't have a process that makes sense, if I don't have a means of getting support when I'm stuck, if I can't reach my direct boss when I need them. You know what I mean? Like, that's, and I think if you create culture and strategy together, that's what culture starts to look like. Culture looks like the things we do to make work better, rather than Band-Aids to make us feel better because we're not knowing what the hell we're doing every day. You know what I mean? So I think, like, ultimately that's what you're getting at there, is like, let them hang out together, and you're going to get the best of both. You're going to get an amazing culture that's rich and deep and not surface level, and you're going to get a strategy that actually pays attention to people's needs as part of the process. Correct. Yeah.
And they're all working at the same objective.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge too, right? Is the strategy lead and the culture lead are not necessarily talking to each other, and they should always be talking to each other because they're serving the same purpose. Yeah. There's another one, a favorite phrase, don't sweat the small stuff. And I think you had a post basically that said, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. You got to sweat the small stuff. So what's your thinking behind that?
So if you want to be successful, I'm going to tell you, it's boring, it's mundane, it's repetitive. There is nothing sexy about it.
Mm-hmm.
Secret to success is consistently doing the ordinary things over and over and over again. And it is small actions over time that produce big results. And so if you want big results, you got to break it down to the small stuff that you can sweat with just a relentless commitment to consistency that's driven by simplicity.
Mm.
And that's how you win. So don't sweat the small stuff. Keep looking at, I want to lose 100 pounds in the next year. To get there. If you say, I want to be perfect to my next meal, you're going to lose those 100 pounds. And so start sweating the small stuff if you want to win on the big scale.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think, I wonder if for some people, the fear is like, so you talk about pendulums, right? If people sweat every last detail of their life too much, it turns into neuroticism, right? It turns into like every decision is overthought, and you know what I mean? And so it's like, my hunch is that phrase may have come up to serve some people who were overdoing it, you know? Yeah. But your take on it reminds me of, the way we do, something like the way we do one thing is the way we do everything or something like that. But the idea that like each thing we do is what matters, and that's ultimately what creates the big effect, totally makes sense to me. And I think there's a way of getting people to see that, like, it's in the details, right? It's how you show up. There's a certain amount of discipline involved in being willing to show up each day and do those small things. They can be boring, but they feel less boring when you know they're serving you, right? If you just told somebody you're going to eat, a few egg whites and some broccoli for breakfast every day, I'd be like, screw you, get away from me. But if you told somebody, listen, at the end of that is this, a certain amount of weight loss, a certain amount of, blood pressure coming down, cholesterol coming down. And all of that leads to, you can enjoy your time with your wife, your kids, your friends better. You can do some of these trips that you wanted to do, but you couldn't want to do. Then it connects. It's like, so it's the ability to recognize, put the small things in the context of the big thing. To me, feels like where it starts to like make sense, right? I'm not just looking at the action I'm taking today. I'm looking at it and recognizing it's serving something bigger, right?
Mara would say that's contribution, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what so many people are looking for. You talk about like, people showing up in the younger generation. I'll just say this. I'm Gen X. I mean, I remember all the slams against Gen X growing up, and we were the slackers and the blah, blah, blah. Like, some of it's just being young, and like, your mindset's in a different place, and you're not sure if any of it really matters yet because you haven't had a chance to connect. So when somebody gives you a chance to say, here's the contribution you can make, and here's what it's contributing to, that's an incredible gift. When I've had jobs like that where it's been made clear to me what we're working towards, I'm going to work 10 times harder, but 25-year-old me shows up and doesn't quite know what the purpose is. I was probably a little lazy because that's like, I was like, what's the point? Right. And so I might have been fitting a stereotype at the time that the silent generation or whoever it was that was looking down at me said, oh, these Gen Xers, So I think, I think we forget sometimes a little bit who we were when we were just coming up and recognize like, yeah, we may have gotten to a place where we did it the way we think we should do it. But it was probably because someone along the line helped us connect our contribution to the greater cause, right? One last one. I know I had commented on this, and I think it's part of a bigger conversation. But you talked about how you're a naturally sarcastic person, right? And you found that you've had to really tamp that down in leadership situations, because a lot of the younger folks aren't connecting to it, or they're taking it literally. And my take was sarcasm, if it's part of your natural state, your natural way of bringing humor, just know your audience and know when it works and when it doesn't. How do you navigate these things as a leader? This is the bigger question, I think. I think you want to show up and meet the people where they are. But I also think if you show up in a way where people can see that you've sort of stripped away yourself and you're maybe not showing up authentically for yourself, that doesn't work either. So how can you balance the need to meet your teams where they are with tapping into who you are and find the way to connect those things?
Yeah. And I mean, there are younger people that absolutely use sarcasm and are completely sarcastic.
Yeah.
And so the difference to me, though, is the element of positional power
Mm-hmm.
and then in relationship to work.
Right.
And so if it has anything to do with their professional life,
Mm-hmm.
For me, when growing up with Seinfeld and The Simpsons, and
Mm-hmm.
it was everywhere. I mean, you look at Married with Children, like that TV show wouldn't even be on TV anymore. Al Bundy would be canceled like a long time ago.
Yep.
And so it's just different how we can communicate, what we can say. And so for me, self-deprecating sarcasm, I can say something about my weight. I can say something about myself, and it's not a big deal to me, or I can, admit, or if somebody says, hey, when you did this at work, dude, that landed like a lead balloon, right? And I'll
Mm-hmm.
laugh off. But what I found is that when you add in positional power and you're working with the younger generations,
Mm-hmm.
anything that's sarcastic or just joking around, like we would call it talking smack,
Mm-hmm.
that relates to professional stuff,
Mm-hmm.
lands differently.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the weekend, or you're talking about them backing their car into a pole in the parking lot, or something related to their professional experiences,
Mm-hmm.
it lands.
Right.
But the element of positional power tied to their professional life, where I found that it's a non-starter. And then even bigger than that is then generationally is if you're working in different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
sarcasm doesn't land in other nations like
For
it does
sure.
in the United States.
Yeah.
And so if you're in a multinational organization that is also dealing with generational differences and you're in a leadership role, you can do what you want, but you're opening up potential risk in utilizing sarcasm. And so for me, what happened was I failed. I would love to say I was perfect at never using sarcasm,
Yeah.
but who I am, I talk smack. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sarcastic, but
Yeah.
the less you do that in a professional like related to a professional task, and when you're in a position of positional power, the better off you are at engaging people from millennials, Gen Z is my experience. I'm not saying that's the golden rule, but that's what I've observed.
Yeah, and I think that's an important way of looking at it, right? It's all through the lens of learning through your own experience and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And my experience probably a little different. I come from the world of advertising, and I think I even mentioned this. It's kind of like a second language is sort of sarcasm. It's just baked into the culture, but there's still, and I would say this goes even beyond sarcasm. It just and humor, even beyond humor. It's just recognizing what styles of communication work for different people. And when you're in a group, there's probably a certain style that can work. And when you're one-on-one, some people resonate with certain things that other people don't resonate with. And being, and this probably comes back to emotional intelligence, being very aware of the kind of communication somebody really needs, and for somebody, they might need a little joking around to kind of get that works for them. For other people, jokes basically just pull them out of like everything. And they suddenly go into like, I don't know if he's being serious or not. Now I'm confused. And I think it comes back to what you had said in your post, like you got to be clear first and foremost. You got to give people communication in a way that they know what to do with it. And I think as leaders, we should just be able to learn that. We should be attuned to that and be attuned to this person needs me to speak this way. Get right to the point. This person needs me to be a little more social at first and then get to the point, because otherwise they feel like I'm being rude and brash and offensive. Like it comes back to, I think that's one method of executing emotional intelligence, being really cognizant of the needs of your people in different settings, one-on-one, group settings. You talked about keynote speeches, like the way you speak in different situations really matters. And it's important to pay attention to that. So whether that's sarcasm or whatever, the ability to learn and grow is what I take away as the big lesson there, and recognize you can adapt and then find other parts of yourself to connect with people. Does that connect for you?
Absolutely. And that's the leadership model is
Yeah.
connection, which is awareness of yourself and awareness of others. And
Mm-hmm.
well, I experienced that. I was a freshman. I was on a freshman football team. We were undefeated, and the scoring, we had 400 points on the year. Our opponents had 20. The closest, we were never behind in a game. The closest a game ever was 0-0 when it started. And our coach was Coach Berezowitz, and he's passed away, but he was a minor league baseball player that had an injury, and because of the injury, he couldn't manage his weight. So he had to ride around practice on a golf cart because he was legitimately really, really big.
Yeah.
And our team was super talented. Multiple guys went on to play college football. I was a starting defensive tackle. And he told me at one point, he pulled me aside and he said, "Josiah, I want to tell you something. There's times where I'm going to yell at you because it's you. But what I want to ask is, there are times where I want to yell at you because I know you can handle it and the rest of the team is going to get the message. Can I yell at you? But if I use your last name, I'm yelling at you to yell at the entire team. But if I use the first name, I'm yelling at you."
Wow.
And I said, absolutely. And so I would go in and I was cordial and friendly, and people liked me on the team. And so if they would hear me getting chewed out at halftime, it would resonate with them as saying, "We got to pick up Josiah. We got to do this. We can't let him get screamed at by Coach Brett."
Yeah.
And I would be sitting there okay, you can say whatever. It's it's not going to rattle me, but I also know that this is the team and not me, right? And so that's really kind of at the root of it, and a really genius way of identifying hey, here's a person that can take it, and I can leverage their ability to take it to drive big results out of the team. And they know that it's for the larger cause of the team, and I know that as well. And so together we're going to do this to move the team forward. I mean, that's what you're talking about, is understanding the person and what they need and align that with the mission of the overall team and the organization. And you get all of that going together in a positive direction.
Yeah.
Look out.
Yeah. God, that's genius. That his recognition of who you were, and then his realization that even though he had an instinct about how you were, he came and talked to you about it very directly, very, on the level with you, and said, "Here's what I'm thinking of doing. Are you open to it?" I mean, that's a pretty powerful demonstration of emotional intelligence, if you ask me. I mean, one that you don't necessarily see all that often, and it certainly runs against a lot of the stereotypes of coaches who maybe are going to yell at players, but don't think about the impact of that specific player or how it affects the team. So I love that demonstration. I think if we all just took a little bit of that to heart as how we relate to the teams that we lead in our own lives, I think that would be pretty powerful for sure. Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, he was really good at yelling.
Some people are. Yeah. I think, I'd rather have somebody like that, though, who at least could recognize the impact it was having, versus somebody who just spouts and spouts and spouts and doesn't realize that not everybody can take it in the same way that some folks can. One thing I wanted to touch on with you, Josiah, is you have some testimonials on your site, and they're pretty awesome. And I think it's always great to see what people say about how they like working with you. One thing I like to ask in that situation, is there a favorite that you've noticed, or is there something that shows up that people say about you that really connects and makes you kind of driven to show up even more that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes up often, is that the workshops, the keynotes, the one-on-one coaching, that it helps me professionally, but it helps me more personally. I've gotten feedback from workshops of, this is going to make me a better father, a better mother, a better husband, a better wife, a better coach for my children's youth team, a better, leader on my church committee. And you start to look at the impact. And when you talk about, this type of training and execute emotional intelligence, it often happens that you start it in the home because it's safer and observation of the impact is much more instant.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if I fail miserably on EQ with my 3-year-old little girl, Kendall, I know it instantly, right?
Yeah.
And in a professional setting, you start to see shoulders drop and contact wane, but it's not like a 3-year-old on the floor kicking and screaming and yelling at your dad at, right? And so it's safer and the impact is instant. And so you initiate and execute in your personal life, and you start to and say, wow, this really does work. And then you start to execute in your professional life. And so that's the greatest thing is if I'm helping equip people to be better human beings and to better relate with others, and it doesn't matter if that's when they're on the clock or off the clock. Yeah, you're right. I want to show up every day and grind this out, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's recognizing something that I think we're talking about a little more, but just the fact that our work and personal lives, I mean, there's a lot of stuff weaving all of that together, and when we're at work, we bring that, we then take that with us and we show up as that person at home, for good or bad, right? Meaning if I feel beaten down at work, I might come home and not be the best version of myself for my family, right? So the impact of the work you can do in a quote unquote professional setting absolutely can impact the personal setting, and the skills that you need in those settings absolutely translate, right? To be a good father, to be a good spouse, to be a good friend, all of that connects to the same stuff you're talking about when it talk about being having good emotional intelligence. Those things are going to serve you anywhere. So I get why that one really resonates with you, and I think that's powerful. I even wonder if that shows up even more a little bit because of your background of having spent time in schools, and like I think a place where the personal and the professional are really meshed together, right? I mean, schools is personal for the majority of the building. That's part of my personal life as a kid. I show up at school, and then you've got this subset of people in the building who are teachers and principals and other administrators who that is their professional world. So did any of that experience lead you to this sort of recognition of that the personal and the professional all can be impacted by some of these emotional intelligence skills?
That right there shaped all of it, honestly.
Yeah.
When you look at work in education, to me, it's the hardest place to lead. As a principal, I was managing stakeholders, and every one of those people was coming to me because they were fueled by passion. You have parents who are sending their children to me for more hours of a day than they're going to see their own kids. You have kids coming to me that are driven by academics, athletics, whatever it may be. Maybe it's just a meal, right, that they're getting there that they're not at home. So they're passionate. Teachers, they don't get into it for the money, right? They get into it because they're passionate. And then you got community members that don't have kids in the schools, but they're paying taxes that are providing for the schools. You want to talk about somebody's money, their children, their profession, like everybody in that equation is fueled and driven by some level of passion. And it's such a wide variety of stakeholders that it is the most complex leadership situation I've seen. I went to the corporate world. At the company I was at, they had a suite where all the C-level people were. It was glass. You could see them. They could see you. They would come out and talk with you. And I would walk past that and I'd see the chief people officer, the chief sales, the chief marketing, the chief operations, the chief executive, the chief strategy, all these C-level executives. And I'd be like, when I was a principal, I did all of those.
Yeah.
And I was expected to do all of those while there's 500 kids running around for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to do that? And it was there where, everything that I did was engagement. When I was the dean of students, it was attendance. And so I was working with families that were in really, really rough situations and previous rough situations. And that's engagement. It was communicating to connect. It was inspiring. It was building trust. It was influencing and empowering people to come into school. And one of the things for me was a kid that wasn't showing up. Their parents didn't want their kids going to school. Their parents wouldn't come to meetings at school because their experience in education was negative.
Mm.
And so they're not going to re-traumatize themselves by walking in as a parent and go through that in a principal's office like they did before. And so I would have to go do home visits and say, hey, I don't want you to come see me. Can I come and sit in your living room and we talk?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was getting meetings and I was starting to connect and kids were coming to school. And we were able to improve the attendance rate for the first time in 4 years. It was the largest increase in 8 years. And the second year was even bigger increase. And the first time in 10 years that was back-to-back positive.
Wow.
And then a school that I became principal at, it was second largest improvement in staff engagement and third in parent engagement out of 18 sites. And so, yeah, there were mistakes, there were failures, there were all these hard pieces, but at the core of it, the impact that I made was my ability to connect, inspire, and engage people. And corporate arena showed me how to do that in a corporate setting. And so here I am, all packaged together with the road rash I told you to look out for, ready to go up and help you not mess up like I did.
I like it. I think that's a pretty cool background, and I can see why. I can see why it will have some of the impact that it's been having already, and it also, I think it probably influences why some of what you share on LinkedIn and et cetera has a slightly different flavor to it, because you've got a pretty unique set of a background there that gives you perspective that maybe some others don't. So I hope more and more people take you up on what you have to offer. And that brings me to a couple final questions I want to get into here. One of which I like to ask is, if you could wave a magic wand and kind of fully desuckify work for people, what would that look like?
I think we touched on it a little bit before, is one, bringing people to a workplace where they are empowered and they're, people come to work and they want to do a good job. 99% of the people want to show up and do a good job and add value. And if you equip those people with clarity, alignment on what's expected and support to deliver it, and you give them the space to execute, you're going to have people that are engaged. You're going to have people that find meaning in work, and you're going to have people that enjoy being together and coming together. And it's always going to be work. I mean, work's called work and not fun for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But you can have fun while doing work and not have fun replace work. And when you get that right, people are going to be inspired, engaged, productive, profitable, and they're going to be smiling when they do it. And that, to me, is what it looks like when you completely desuckify work. Yeah. And I'm here for that kind of energy, TJ.
I love it. And I like the distinction you made there. It's not about having fun replace work. It's about having fun while doing the work, like giving people enough sense of connection and contribution and meaning in the work that it becomes fun, rather than sprinkling in 20 different, free donut things and all the other stuff that, like, again, nice. But if you just make work all about that, it's not work anymore. So I think that's a really helpful distinction. How can you make people feel connected to work in a way where it becomes fun, or at least enjoyable, or taps into their passion, or gets them excited to show up, or gets them curious about what else they could do and what else they could solve? Yeah, I think that sounds pretty desuckified, if you ask me. Yeah. So one of the last questions I'll ask before I give you a chance to tell people how to follow you and all that good stuff is, I use a lot of sound effects on this show, and if you've listened or watched, you may have noticed there's some cat sounds and some other weird sounds in the intro to the show and the outro. You up for giving us one to add to your episode?
I will. Do I get a chance to give some context to this first?
Absolutely. Please do.
All right. So the sound effect is what does it sound like to desuckify work, right?
Sure.
So I'm going to go with the cat theme. And if you've ever experienced trying to get a cat out of a place that they didn't want you to get them out of, you know how challenging that is. And that is the same thing with the suck at work. It is a legacy. It is a lifestyle. It is going to go clawing and scratching as you and me are here to try and desuckify it and remove it from the workplace. So that's the context. And this is what I think it sounds like.
As a cat person, I have heard that sound a few thousand times in my life. I love it. Yeah. And I love the context you gave, right? Because taking the suck out of work is not easy. It is a rigid, fairly hard to move object, but it can be done. The same way a cat can theoretically be moved out of a place without getting that reaction, but you got to work. It takes some work. It takes, in the cat situation, I think it takes like being willing to be a little patient and eventually like get that cat to realize it wants to move on its own. And I think it's kind of a similar process here where you can have some patience, give people some new information, and then hopefully people will start to work the suck out on their own rather than somebody trying to come in and just yank it, in which case I think you're going to hear the sound pretty frequently. And that's awesome. I love that, Josiah. On that note, let's give people a chance to find more of your wisdom. What's the best way to track you online?
LinkedIn, for sure, is every day. Fresh content comes out at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time, a little bit later on Saturdays and Sundays. Mm-hmm. It's fun. There's insights. There's humor. I've been very, very fortunate, and I would say blessed by the strength of the community that I've built and had people come along. I've got 3,000 followers. Yesterday, I had 175 comments.
Wow.
And so you can look at accounts that have 18,000 followers and have less comments than that. So it is a passionate, engaged, committed group that likes to have fun, likes to put forward the power of human connection, and likes to learn and contribute. Yeah. And so look me up on LinkedIn, Josiah Pledl, or 45 Degrees Leadership Development. And let's connect and come join the community. I'd love to hear your voice. I'd love to hear your insights and wisdom, and you will be welcome every single day.
That's awesome. I can vouch for the quality of your content. I think it's always fun. It's always interesting. It's often provocative in some of the ways we talked about, where you challenge some of the established wisdom, which I think is great. Even if people come and don't agree with everything you say, you got them thinking, and you're nudging them towards new awareness. And I think that's what people are craving, particularly on LinkedIn. It's like people want to learn and grow. And I think you're providing the kind of content that sparks that. And again, you do it in kind of a fun way. You do it, you have a voice. There's some consistency there, some fun visuals. Yeah, I would recommend everybody follow Josiah. Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, I know we went pretty long with this one, but I think it was a really fun conversation, Josiah. So thank you for being patient as we worked our way through all this good stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this to go out and to see the reaction, and hopefully together, TJ, we can continue to work to desuckify work together. I'm here for it.
Yeah, let's do it, Josiah. All right. Well, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Desuckify Work Podcast. And thanks to Josiah for bringing bold thinking and big energy to the show. You can follow Josiah on LinkedIn, where he shares his views on leadership and life. You should also check out his site at 45degreesleadership.com, which is packed full of goodness and hope. I hope you check out my website and my Substack newsletter. They're packed full of snark and substance in equal measure for creatives who want more from work. If that kind of thing floats your boat, let's talk more during a free half-hour Desuckified discovery session. Bye, everyone.